Joe, before you start, just tell us, what is this that you're going to be doing? It's a picture of the global economy?
It's a bit more than that, Toby. I've entitled it The World Beyond the Horizon. It's what's coming to us, but we can't quite see it yet. The cliche I often use is, most managers spend most of their time with their nose on the desk. Now, I've never done the following, but if you fire a missile to the moon and you're wrong by 1 degree, you'll miss it by many thousands of kilometers. So it's really a challenge to all of us in business. Take our nose off the desk. Targets are very important, by the way. We need to hit those targets.
Of course.
But are we going in the right direction? What's coming? And again, another analogy, imagine you're on a railway track as a train coming, and it's coming very fast, but you can't see it yet. You'd look for early warning signs. It may be the sound, it may be vibration, it might be a timetable, but you can't stop this train. So it's coming. It could be inflation, it could be recession, it could be a geopolitical shock, but you can't stop it individually. But what can you do? And of course, the answer is get off the track. Yeah. So this is about preparing people for what's coming. This is not about futurology. I'm not looking at the next, if we land on Mars, what will life look like? This is about the reality today. So I'm talking about a time period, probably the next 5 or 10 years maximum. What's coming towards us and are we ready for it? That's the context.
Here's your chance to ask pretty much any questions in the text chat if you can, not audio, text chat questions only. Pin your ears back. You're going to be hearing about a new order. Tell us more, Joe.
Thank you. Well, let me start then, if I may. Folks, as I say, the title is meant to get your attention. The world beyond the horizon. As I said earlier, the horizon comes to us every day. But what else is coming to us? Well, not every day, but at the moment. What are the challenges we're facing? And I just want to introduce you to a little...
Let's bring those slides up if we can.
Just bring the slides up if you can, Chris. I'm just waiting to pop to the next slide. And we seem to have a little glitch.
Bear with.
There you go. So I've just used a little framework here, which I'm hoping you'll take away and use in your own business context. Rolf developed this reflective thinking model. What's happening, and we'll discuss that. But I guess the big question is, so what? What does this mean for you and your organizations, individually as well as collectively? And then now what? What are we going to do about what's happening? So the train's coming. So what? It's going to hit me. Now what? Get off the train, get off the track. So I want you to use this, and if you have any questions, please, as Toby said, pop them into the chat box, and I will do my best to give you answers. But let's be clear, nobody has the ability to predict the future. And I want to remind you about a famous quote from Niels Bohr: "Prediction is very difficult, especially if it's about the future." You may recognize the name Niels Bohr. If you saw the movie Oppenheimer, this was the part played by Kenneth Branagh. This was the nuclear physicist who got a Nobel Prize in 1922. But I think this quote is so relevant today. I must say that, in my opinion, we're living in the most uncertain environment, economic and political environment that I can remember in my professional career. If anybody feels certain about the future, please contribute and help us all to feel a bit more informed. So come with me on this journey. I'm going to take you through a number of drivers of change, some of these big developments that are happening now. There'll be nothing new, by the way, because if a trend has been established, we can all see it. But I'm more concerned about the what, the so what, and the now what questions. And I'm going to pose a number of questions to you as well, again, to leave you thinking about these. Now, here's probably the most famous quote in history, I guess. It's not the most intellectual of the species that survives. It's not the strongest that survives. But the species that survives is the one that is able best to adapt and adjust. And those are the key words within this presentation today. I want you to keep thinking about that. Are you able to adapt and adjust to the changing environment in which we find ourselves? COVID 5 years ago, when the lockdowns began, really was a shock to all of us. And sad to say, there are many organizations that have that they now find themselves in what I call the corporate graveyard. These were companies that were not able to adapt and adjust in whatever way we can describe that. Those that didn't have online businesses, for example, and that's the most obvious shock to them. So, this is a very old quote, but it's as relevant today as it was then in the times of Charles Darwin. But I want to bring a little cartoon sketch into this slide, again, just to stimulate your own thinking. Just take a few seconds and look at this cartoon. And just maybe you want to put in the chat box, what is this telling you? What is your immediate reaction to it? See, when I first spotted this online, and I've given the reference, by the way, to it, so I borrowed this from the internet, but it's not my slide, my cartoon. But the impression that I got from this was, the thought of how long did it take to go from the extreme left to the person sitting at the computer? How long did that evolution take? Well, as we know, it was very many hundreds of thousands of years to go from the left to the computer expert sitting there. But then the question in my mind is, how long will it take to go from the person at the computer to the robot? The robots are coming, and I will mention AI and robotics later in this presentation, but I think everyone will agree it's not going to take hundreds of thousands of years for people to be replaced by robots. It's happening already. And to me, that's the key message today. It's not about change, it's about the pace of change. Are you ready? Are you able to adapt and adjust to the pace of change? In my opinion, and by the way, it's simply my opinion, I think we're going to see more change in the next 5 years than we've seen in the last 50 years. I say that for effect, but I actually think it's going to be true. I think the pace of change is accelerating. And for all of us, therefore, we have to ask, are we ready for this? There are no exceptions, by the way. There will be some skills, some jobs that will be replaced by robots. It's happening already. And the question is, will those people be able to retrain quick enough? There's one economic concept that's been well known about, but it's becoming very topical today. You may want to look this up later. It's called Kondratiev cycles. Kondratiev cycles are named after a Russian economist called Kondratiev, obviously. They're often called the K-wave or the long wave cycles, but they describe how technology changes economies over a long period of time, perhaps 50 years. So for example, when water was turned into steam and somebody then invented the steam engine, well, it took many, many decades before it transformed the lives of people. In 1908, when Henry Ford launched the Model T Ford, the first mass-produced car, it was several decades before it transformed the lives of people. And we still had people driving horse and carts, but then they were replaced with cars. In the USA, there were some riots, by the way, as people lost their jobs. And then we had the big consumer durable boom of the 1960s and thereafter, when washing machines replaced manual hand washing, for example. But again, it took a long time before it transformed the lives of people across the world. And in the last 10 or 20 years, we've been in the middle of the latest K-wave or long wave cycle, the ICT, the information communication technology cycle. We're in the middle of it. And of course, robotics will be the next phase in that. But it's not going to be 50 years that we will have to adjust and adapt. I think it's going to be a matter of a few years before we feel the impact of this on our lives. So, I mean, please don't be offended by this, but how many accountants will we need in 5 years' time when all the information is up there in the cloud and I press a button and my accounts are done? How many lawyers will we need to look up case law? Well, you press a button now and ChatGPT will give you the case law in seconds. How many academics will we need? I could be an avatar in 5 years' time. I've been to see ABBA, by the way, as Avatar. So I'm just teasing you a little bit, but I'm not a technologist, but I want you to think about what's coming, such as robotics, and how will it change our lives and change the world of business. And are you ready for it? And there's no doubt that, our MBA at Cranfield is all about preparing you for the future. It's not about just reading more textbooks. I don't know why people read textbooks anymore. The information is out there. I can press a button and get a summary. It's about preparing you for the challenges ahead. That's what the Cranfield MBA is all about. So again, sit back and let me take you on a journey. And I'm going to start just by throwing questions. And I don't have answers to these questions. They're intended as food for thought for all of us. And I keep asking myself these questions. I keep asking my colleagues these questions. And I want you to ask these of yourself as well. So at the very top level, how do you think, nations in different parts of the world, how are they going to change and develop in the coming years? And you'll hear me say later that I tend to focus on, well, many countries, but one particular country today is getting my attention. 30 years ago, 35 years ago, when I was, looking at the global economy, the focus then for me was on China. And people thought, well, why are we discussing China? It was a very poor country. Today, China is obviously at the top of our agenda. But I think the next country that's worth looking at very carefully as the next superpower is India. India is the fastest growing country in the world today. It's also the biggest population in the world today and doing exceptionally well. So I think we're going to see different parts of the world develop. Some countries will do better than others. And I'll discuss that, as I said, later in this presentation. What are some of the new normals that we're all facing as we try to respond to the challenges that are coming at us? If you remember, once again, COVID, I mustn't use that too many times as an example. But COVID did force certain new normals onto us, such as hybrid working. But that has become a new normal that's here to stay. I can't imagine reverting back to the way we worked before, although some companies are trying to go back to the old normal. But what other new normals are there? The way we shop. I mean, I rarely go to a shop these days, very rare. I'm online when I shop, and I think that's efficient, but of course, for me, it's natural. But for some people, it's still a very, a novelty. But what about in the next 5 years? What are some of the other new normals that will change the way we live and work and interact on a permanent basis? They become the new normal. And then a huge question, what will winning companies look like in the future? Who will they be and what will they look like? What will be the characteristics? But I want you to ask that question of yourselves. What will you need to look like to be classified as a winner? What will be the skills that you'll need to develop to be successful in the years ahead? I'm old enough to remember companies like Encyclopedia Britannica, which in 1990 celebrated its 225th birthday in 1990. Within 24 months, it was wiped out. How can a company that's 225 years old be wiped out in 24 months? Well, they didn't see the future coming towards them. They didn't see the train coming. But they should have created their own future. They should have had the resources, the creativity, the innovation to create their future. They let other forces drive them out of business. And you're probably thinking of the internet, by the way. It wasn't the internet initially. It was the launch of a CD-ROM called Encarta, which was the death knell of Encyclopedia Britannica. And then, of course, in the last decade or so, we had another company called Kodak that's been wiped out in terms of its operations. Although I noticed on the television last night, films are coming back into fashion as a niche business. But Kodak, has been around for 130, 140 years. But their business has been wiped out by digital cameras. And yet, ironically, Kodak invented the digital camera. But they couldn't make this part of their DNA. It wasn't part of their DNA. They didn't adapt to the future. So again, what will winners look like? What will you need to look like to be successful in a changing global environment? A few other questions before we go into content here. And I think in every presentation, we should all mention and pay respect to corporate governance and sustainability. I don't just say the words. I think we've got to think seriously about how these will impact all of us in the years ahead. Every single person on the planet should be conscious of this and aware of this and do something about it. So what are the implications for you personally and for your organizations? And of course, there's lots of positive things I'm going to talk about. This is not all meant to be gloom and doom. I think there are huge opportunities that are going to exist, that are going to emerge in the years ahead, which maybe we can't see yet. But of course, there are risks for many of us. As I say, those who don't or aren't able to adapt and adjust, well, and sadly, the corporate graveyard, I think, will be even fuller. But so what are the risks that you face as a result of changes in the global economy? And are you ready to deal with these risks? So there will be some losers, but I think there's going to be many winners as well, by the way. So again, think about the purpose of what I said earlier of the MBA. It's about preparing you to be a winner for the future. Now, please don't try and read this slide. I wouldn't normally put this on the screen, but I want to use this slide as the basis for the rest of the presentation. I'm going to go around this from 1 to 10. I've only got 10 points, by the way, and I'll explain each one to some extent. I could put 100 points on this slide, but that would be rather confusing. I just highlighted what I think are some of the biggest trends shaping the world around us. And I say all of these are happening already. There is no futurology. There's no crystal ball gazing here. This is what you and I can see today. And remember the question, the what, the so what, and the now what. What's next? So let me start with the first one, which I'm sure you're all well aware of this. The populations around the world in different countries are growing at different rates, but the so-called developed world, we're aging and the birth rate's declining. I actually don't like to use the word developed, so apologies if that's offensive. But what I mean by that are the richest countries, the ones with the highest income per capita. As I say, it's not my choice, but it's the word that's used these days to describe different categories of countries. So the so-called developed world is aging. For example, Japan would be probably the best example. It's got a rapidly aging population, and the population is actually getting smaller because the birth rate has fallen. So they have a challenge ahead of them. But as I was saying to Toby earlier, Japan knows this. This is not a secret. They've been well aware of it for many years. And in some ways, they're preparing for this, not by having more children, but by investing in technology. So robots replacing people is one solution to this problem. And why not? If the robots can do the work, the Japanese can play more golf, perhaps. But I think that's wonderful. It will create some problems, by the way, because with a shrinking population, then the owners of the robots will be generating the income. So we need to think of some way to distribute the national income to the rest of the people. But I'll come back to that later. Of course, this is not the same development happening everywhere, as I said. And I'll come later to the developing countries where in many cases, but not in all cases, in many cases, the populations are growing rapidly. So I'll come back to that. This phrase, New World Order, gosh, is being used a lot in the last few days concerning the discussions between some of the major superpowers negotiating peace treaties and so on. I think we are seeing in real time a New World Order emerging. But, there's a frightening aspect of this, but I think there's also a very important positive element. So by New World Order, I'm referring to the rise of new emerging markets, creating new markets and growth opportunities for companies across the world. You've all heard, I'm sure, of the BRICS economies, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And a couple of those BRICS haven't done as well as we expected 30 years ago when Goldman Sachs first coined that phrase. But now the new phrase is being used to describe the next big group of potentially successful economies are the so-called mint economies. Being put in a category doesn't guarantee success, but mint stands for Mexico, Indonesia, Nigeria, and Turkey. They have the potential to be the next hugely successful emerging markets. And in the next 5-10 years, we're going to talk, I'm sure, about more economies emerging. And these are called frontier economies, the ones that are classified as developing, often described as being at the base of the pyramid, sadly, the lowest income countries. But, as capital moves around the world, as technology moves around the world, as education expands across the globe, many of these countries will also be able to enjoy growth and the opportunity that we've had. So I think in the next 5-10 years, we're going to see many more countries beginning to come up from the base of the pyramid. And we should all be celebrating that. I think for me, it's wonderful to think that many more people in the world, many more hundreds of millions will be able to enjoy better quality of life, more than one meal a day. And we should all be celebrating that. Of course, I do recognize that growth will put a strain on resources. I said earlier, we should always be mindful of sustainability. It'll also put tremendous pressure on health services and the public sector. Let me just expand on this a little bit. Imagine the following, and I've seen this happen, by the way. I used to live in a poorer part of an African country for a couple of years when I was very young. But can you imagine what happens in a country when the average income per capita goes from $1 a day to $2 a day in terms of purchasing power, where they come up from the base of the pyramid, or $2 to $4, or $4 to $8? Just think of how many hundreds of millions of people in the last 5, 10, 15, or 20 years, how many have begun to see their living standards rise. Very, extreme poverty to being able to have a better quality of life. Well, just think what happens to the demands from those people, the demands from their governments, the demands from their public service, demands for things such as clean drinking water, for a water tap, demand for electricity, demand for basic housing, demand for street lighting, demand for health services, demand for education. I think we are seeing today, we have been seeing this for some years, by the way, but we're seeing it today. I think the biggest explosion in demand for services that are normally provided by the public sector than we've ever seen in history. This is an explosion in demand. I often say to my students, if I had my career to live over again, I think I'd become a consultant to the public sector, because that's where the big changes are required. It's not just about generating value for money in the public sector, it's about value for many. This is a volume game, and I think it's wonderful to witness it, but it does create challenges, but huge opportunities. As I said, it's a positive message. My third driver of change is looking at it, I just hinted at it earlier, in the developing world, in the so-called developing world, populations in many cases are still growing. Not the case necessarily in countries like China, but of course I'm referring to many other parts of the world. So for example, the continent of Africa, which is not one country, I accept that, but if I take Africa as a continent, it has the fastest growing population in the world. And if you look on your phone, by the way, and you Google the following, look at the median age of Nigerians as an illustration. It's quite remarkable. The last time I looked, the median age was something like 17.9 or 18 years of age. What that means is there are as many people above that age as below that age in Nigeria. It's a young, dynamic, growing population, well over 200 million people now, and getting bigger and bigger. The biggest population of an African country. Remember the question, the what, the so what, and the now what. When countries like Nigeria, as they invest more and more in education, we are going to see a huge growth in talent around the world. And I think that's to be welcomed, by the way. So for people in developing countries and emerging markets, as I say this with, humility. I'm so pleased for them that living standards are increasing and poverty is declining for many people, but not for everybody. And education is one of the fastest growing sectors, along with health services and public sector in the world. In the last 10 years, from 2015 to 2025, the UN estimates that the number of university students worldwide has more than doubled, from about 125 million to over 260 million. I don't know the exact number today, but it's more than doubled. We have seen an explosion in education across the world, and that must be welcomed by all of us. This is going to create huge opportunities, and more importantly, by the way, I think it's going to create huge release of entrepreneurialism and creativity into the world. See, I'm old enough to remember that most of the technologies that we use today have, at least I've used, have been developed in the so-called Western economies. But I think we're seeing an explosion in ideas and creativity from other parts of the world that we didn't expect. And I think that is to be welcomed. My fourth driver of change is urbanization. I just checked these figures just yesterday again, and this has not slowed down. This is gathering momentum. Urbanization refers to the number of people moving from rural areas, from the land, to the city areas, to urban centers. The Economist Intelligence Unit had an estimate about a decade ago. They estimated that the number of people moving from the land to the cities every 2 weeks is the equivalent of a 1 million person city being formed every 2 weeks. Just think about what I've just said, what they've said. A 1 million person city being created every 2 weeks as a visual. And then remember the so what. And then the now what? What does that imply for housing? Implies for transportation, for food production? What does it imply for, well, crime? What does it imply for mental health? What does it imply for pollution? These are huge issues. And of course, perhaps most importantly, what does it imply for infrastructural development? The UN have also estimated that in 2025, this year, they estimate that 600 cities of the world, the development of in those cities, 600 cities infrastructure development will account for something like 60% of world GDP growth. It's a remarkable thought. So the regeneration of old towns, of old buildings, of old roads, and the development of new towns and new cities, and new hospitals and new schools, this is what's driving the world economy. Of course, urbanization brings with it migration of people, not just from the land to the cities, but from country to country. And I think it's true to say that we now have more people moving around the world every day than ever before in history. I don't have a bit of data for that, but just I can imagine this being the case. Even going on holidays, the movement of people for tourist reasons. Sadly, also for political reasons, or people who are being relocated for reasons that are not very nice to think about. But and for business as well. So this is a global phenomenon. I don't need to exaggerate this point. So urbanization and migration are two major drivers of change. Again, please keep thinking about the so what and the now what aspects here. You'll see it in the top left-hand corner of the slide to remind you of that. My fifth driver of change is one that we're all familiar with, and indeed we're living it right now. For the first time in history, almost everybody in the world can talk to each other today. The internet has killed distance. Again, think what that implies for connectivity and for how we interact with each other. And I've just mentioned here, by the way, a new generation of children called the Alpha generation. The children born since March 2010, which is rather precise date, by the way. March 2010 is the month and the year when the iPad was launched. And children born since then are the first true digital natives. So when a child swipes the television and says, "Mum, the television isn't working," for them, digital is normal. And it's wonderful to see it. I've had my first grandchild, and it's remarkable. At 17 months and talking into telephones, mobile phones. I'm still shocked by this, but this is the normal. This is the new normal. And so Generation Alphas, the question that's being asked is, are they going to think, behave, respond, react? Are they going to be motivated by the same things that I was motivated by? In what way could they be different? And the answer is we don't know. We don't know. We're predicting the future, and predicting the future is very difficult. I'll just quote this reference from Mark McCrindle and Ashley Fell. Mark McCrindle will be regarded as probably the most well-known person in the world studying the generations, and he coined this phrase Generation Alpha in his book 2021 called Generation Alpha. Every generation creates change, but occasionally the times and trends collide, and a generation has enormous impact. Shapes the culture beyond all measure. I just want you to think of the following. If your business is targeting, people between 18 and 25, let's say you're a fast-moving fashion retailer and your target audience is 18 to 25. Well, in a few years' time, your customers will be emerging as the new generation, as the Generation Alpha. Some of them are now 15 years of age, from 2010 to 2025. But in a few years' time, they'll be your customers. They'll also be your employees. They'll also be citizens of the world. And are they going to be any different in their mindsets? Are we going to be able to motivate them in the same way? What will they think of ethics? How are they going to judge businesses? How are they going to judge politicians? Will they be different from me, for example? I'm sure they will be. When I was young, I mustn't offend anybody, but we trusted politicians. We trusted the BBC. We trusted the legal system. Today, in many countries, people have less trust in these institutions. So what will Generation Alpha, how will they feel about the impact or the importance of institutions that surround them? And here's a little graphic that I produced, a little picture. the people born after the Second World War are often called the silent generation or the builders for obvious reasons, the rebuilding that took place. And then the baby boomers, again, for obvious reasons. This was the big population bubble that expanded, the growth in the populations. And then after that, generations were given a letter. I'm not sure they liked being given a letter X, Y, or Z. So then we have millennials and Zoomers. But along comes the latest generation that I mentioned earlier, Generation Alpha. And just a couple of things to think about. As I said earlier, they are the digital native, the first people born into a digital world. And it's estimated at approximately 2.5 million babies are born every week across the world. And if you do a quick math calculation, they reckon by 2010 to 2025, that's this year in other words, we're approaching a figure of nearly 2 billion Generation Alphas in the world. Now, the world population has already exceeded 8 billion. So we're something like 8.1 billion at the moment. They're going to be approaching a quarter of the world's population. And so I'll just leave you with 3 questions. What does this imply for government? Will this generation, will they trust governments? Will they want to vote? Will they bother to vote? And what government policies are going to attract them as voters? What does this mean for business? How are you going to attract, retain, and motivate workers? I can't imagine a Generation Alpha worker working in a factory for 40 years doing the same thing. I can't imagine that. That just is alien to my imagination. But so how are you going to attract them into jobs? And I'm quite sure they're going to want to have projects, variety. You're going to have to keep moving them into different tasks to make sure you increase or retain their motivation. But how are you going to retain them? Are they going to want to move from company to company? And then what about business ethics? How will they feel about certain ethic or certain practices of companies? I think it takes decades to build up a brand. I think it'll take seconds to destroy a brand. And Generation Alpha will be very quick to act against companies if they're not seen to be ethical. And then what's the implication for society? Will they be more caring of others? Will they be more supportive? Will wealth generation be as important to them as it has been to some other generations? And again, these are huge questions. I don't have the answers, but I'm hoping you're beginning to think about some questions for me. So just a few more drivers to mention. And I've talked about robotics, but of course we need to think about AI as well and quantum computing. And if you haven't used ChatGPT yet, then I recommend it to you. I use it frequently. It's quite remarkable, the power of gathering information and quickly putting it into a format that's usable. But these are massive disruptions. These technological developments are going to disrupt the way we work, the way we travel, the way we communicate, the way we make decisions. But these are a force for good, and they may be a force for bad. But you can't reverse these technological developments. So what are you doing? How are we going to cope with these changes in the future? As I said earlier, I think there will be many skills that will be made redundant. That's sad for people who are then made redundant. But it's an opportunity to retrain. It's an opportunity to create more time, perhaps, for other things, such as leisure. If we can be more productive and more efficient using AI, robotics, and quantum computing, that's to be welcomed. And in particular, quantum computing, it takes years and years to develop, new vaccines, for example. Well, perhaps with quantum computing, we can do these things much faster and solve many of our problems much faster. This become a huge issue for medical science. How they can generate new pharmaceuticals, specialty medicines, new solutions to illnesses that would have taken so long, and now we're doing it faster and faster. Of course, it's a question of gathering the data. So big data is critical. I just heard on the news this morning, there's developments here in the UK where they're now discussing being able to harness all of the information that patients have provided, 60 million people, to the National Health Service here in the UK. We're talking about the ethics of this morning on the British television. But if they can harness this information, they can then almost begin to predict your illness before you're ill. Because with the data, they can then use AI to then generate such detailed knowledge. Of course, this applies also to companies. If companies can gather information, more and more data, and analyze it faster and faster and faster, then companies can predict what's going to happen to their businesses before they decline or before they grow. I always take Amazon as a great example of this, by the way. I'm a great fan of Amazon. You may not agree with me, but I'm a great fan of them, because what they've done is make something very complex seem very simple. But they're brilliant at creating needs I didn't know I needed. So if you order order a plate, they'll then send you an email saying, well, why don't you buy some spoons? People are buying spoons and plates. I'm being very simplistic in my arguments, but it's about using data, the collection of data, and AI systems and quantum computing, and being able to, well, predict your needs even before you know you need them. That's quite remarkable, by the way. Just a few more points. We are living in a very complex world. I just mentioned the word complexity earlier, but I want to say something about complexity. And this is something that the MBA will absolutely help you develop. I think the most successful companies and the most successful managers and leaders in those companies are going to be those people and those companies who can make complexity seem simple. Let me repeat that. I think the most successful people and companies are those who can make complexity seem simple. First of all, what do I mean by complexity? Well, I'm dealing with all this stuff. The world that I'm describing to you, I think is incredibly complex. The speed of technology change, the speed of competition, the speed of how people are reacting, the connectivity, the changes that we're seeing in the political environment. I think this is incredibly complex for doing business in a world like that. But the most successful companies and most successful people are those who make complexity seem simple. I think that's why Amazon is so successful. They make a very complex buying decision seem very simple. Click, click, and click. It arrives at your door. I'm amazed by that. And it's not the only example, by the way. You'll have your own examples of companies that do that. But would you want to do business with a company that made that process seem more complex? I don't want complexity in my life. I want simplicity. Please make it simple for me. That's what the MBA is going to help you to develop. And of course, complexity is also a function of climate change and pandemics. And the most successful companies have dealt with this complexity, as well as social disruption. And of course, now we have, well, sadly, in some cases, geopolitical breakdowns and transformations. But companies are looking at this and looking for opportunities as well. The most successful companies are those that can cope with complexity and make it seem simple. We're now seeing in real time, I said earlier, I think a change in the balance of power. And this isn't just negative. It's simply stating a trend that I believe is firmly established. Post-Second World War, the USA was the dominant superpower. Europe then emerged from the Treaty of Rome in 1957 as a major superpower. But today we now have, of course, more than one, more than two. We now have at least three superpowers. There is no question about this. And on my previous slide, I mentioned India. And I think in some years from now, I'll be adding India to this. I look forward to that, by the way. I look forward to adding other countries to this, because I think we need more superpowers so that negotiations are more balanced. I think having one superpower is not necessarily a good thing. For obvious reasons. I mean, we rely on the dollar. Well, what about relying more on the euro, relying more on the renminbi or the yuan, the Chinese currency? But I think what we're seeing in real time today is a change in this balance of power, a power play. And that has implications, by the way, not just for political power, but for trade relationships. And I particularly point out the strategy of China, which I respect highly. I think China is being incredibly long-term in their strategic decision-making by investing and lending money to many African countries, for example. It's establishing long-term trade relationships. That's smart. That's very smart. And I think other countries are going to have to wake up and realize what this implies in the long term for their trade relationships. I come to the second last point. Sadly, I think we are living in a world that is less stable for lots of reasons, but certainly in terms of politics. And we're also seeing, the growth of mega corporations. There are some companies today that are the size of the companies are bigger than the size of some countries. So I think we're going to see in the years ahead more mega corporations becoming as, if not more powerful than some governments. And that gives me some cause for concern. The companies can actually change the way countries behave. Again, a cause for concern, but I'm not going to say more about it at this point. I just leave that hanging there on the slide. And then I come to my last point, and I'm just conscious that I've got a few minutes left. I think for some of the developed economies, the so-called mature economies, I think we're now entering a new phase. And in this, I include Europe, by the way, and that includes the UK. I think we're seeing slower growth in some countries around the world, particularly, as I said, the most developed countries. And I think the effect of AI and robotics will shake out a number of jobs and will cause a disruption to incomes, because as the mega corporations are responsible for more economic activity, as AI replaces some skills and some jobs, there will be a challenge for governments and for companies in terms of how do we distribute the national income to those people who don't have jobs, who don't have skills that are in demand anymore, and who cannot retrain quick enough. So the question of universal basic income has been popping up in recent years as a necessary movement towards spreading out the income around our populations. So let me finish in the next few minutes, literally, just with a couple of quotes. I think we are living in a time of rapid change, but think of the railway track. Standing still is the most dangerous course of action. Standing on that railway track is not a good idea. But the manager has their eye on the bottom line. That's my concept about nose on the desk. Hitting targets is very important, by the way, but the leader has their eye on the horizon. And the Cranfield MBA is absolutely about developing transformational leaders. It's about transforming you and your skills into being the next category, a next cadre of leaders in the organizations around the world. So, this is about looking up and looking out. And so finally, the last slide, in terms of what I've been talking about, a wonderful quote here from David Cafaro. Strategic resilience is a phrase we use a lot these days, and certainly post-COVID, it's become very popular to talk about this. But strategic resilience is the practice of thinking forward while leading through present turbulence. Adapting, I remember that word adapting earlier, adapting to difficult operating circumstances while looking beyond the current conditions to keep focused on the horizon. This is a very positive message, by the way. But the question I'll leave you with is, given the trends shaping the business environment, and whatever country you're from, you will recognize, I'm sure, many, if not all of these. How resilient are you individually in terms of your skills, and how resilient is your organization that you're working for? So I'm going to stop there, and I'm hoping you've got some questions for me. I'm very happy to try and answer them, and if not, I know Toby will answer them for me as well. Thank you very much.
Jay, that was amazing. I want a round of applause there. Hopefully that's put you in the mood to think more along the MBA lines. I think Ankit, thank you for your question. I'm going to jump straight to Ankit's question, because Ankit was saying, what can I do? This massive picture that you paint, what can I do?
Well, what can any of us do is the question. But in very simple terms, and this is a very simplistic answer, is prepare. I sadly, or gladly, I spend all of my time just reading about what's happening, not looking to the future in 50 years, but what's happening now, and then trying to assess what does that mean for me, for my organization, for Cranfield University, for the MBA program design, for the content, but do the same thing. That's the what, the so what, and now what. What are you doing to prepare yourself for the future? I know that sounds very simplistic, and it sounds easy. It's not easy, by the way, but I think I must stress this. This is about investing in yourself. And if there's one cliche I'd like to leave you with, it's investment is the engine of growth. You've got to invest in yourself to prepare for the future and to be part of that changing environment that I described earlier. So please don't stop investing in yourself. Whether you do the Cranfield MBA or not, invest in your own skills.
Ankit, we want you on the Cranfield MBA. We like the question, so that's where we want to see you. Thank you. A few more questions if I can, then I want to jump out to Alex if I can. Brilliant one here. You talked about expected change. What is the biggest unexpected change that you see in 5 years?
Wow.
It's like the unknown in that Rumsfeld kind of quadrant.
Again, great question, and the answer is I don't know. It's a very simple answer. We don't know what we don't know. What I would say is there will be more changes. I've only scratched the surface here. There will be more changes we don't expect. That's true. I mean, gosh, do I expect a world war? No, I hope there isn't going to be one. I don't want to say I expect one. Do I expect, Apple to survive? I do. Is it possible they may not survive? It's possible. So, in some ways, these are hypotheticals in some ways. So I'm an economist. I did say I'm not a futurologist. And
You did.
I prefer to stick with the knowns because I feel more confident that I can plan for that. But you're absolutely right. There is the unexpected. And we shouldn't forget that. But you can't know what the unexpected is.
No.
All you can do is prepare for and be dynamic, to be resilient, to be able to cope with the unexpected. That's the only thing I can possibly say to you.
To pick up your point, you made a good point earlier on. Investing in your development, doing an MBA here at Cranfield, is one way to have the antenna listening out.
Absolutely.
One more question before I go to the rest of the team here. And this is from someone, Carlos. Thank you, Carlos, for your question. In Brazil, this is about education, the explosion of education, and it's to do with quality. Okay, so we have an explosion of education, and maybe ChatGPT and AI is going to help with that. Do you see a corresponding diminution in quality of education?
Great question, Carlos. I'm often asked that question, and I'm going to hesitate for a moment. How can I answer this in a way that's not going to offend anybody? I mentioned earlier, or I didn't mention earlier, I talked about India. I've heard that India graduates more PhDs in computer science every year than the whole of Europe. I can believe that, by the way. And I was asked some time ago, what's the quality like? And I thought it was a very poor question, because it reveals that that particular questioner didn't understand the competition there is in India to get to that level of education. It's intensive, and it's the best of the best of the best. So especially in developing and emerging markets, and I've lived in many countries like that, and I've been to Brazil as well, the competition is so intense that actually the quality rises. And so, in my opinion, when you've got hungry people, enthusiastic people who want to come out of their poverty, or they want to get to a better place in life, I think the quality rises, not dilutes. I think the problem of quality is more a question for developed countries, not for emerging and developing countries, because competition drives you to quality. So I'm optimistic in that respect. But of course, I'm aware there are some examples of quality going down. I don't want to sound like a salesman. Let me stress to you, I've been at Cranfield now for 41 years. I see no diminution of quality. In fact, I see the opposite. We focus on quality, and I would hope you will come and enjoy that with us at Cranfield as well.
What a fantastic segue, because on the quality point, I'm going to hand over now to Alex, who is a product of a Cranfield Executive MBA. Alex, hopefully you're there joining us online. Alex, good to see you. I'm loving that blue suit there. Tell us, Alex, you work for Circularity. I want to hear a little bit more about that, but you were an MBA when? Give us your dates and tell us a bit more about your experience.
Of course, very glad to. I was Exec MBA 2011 to 2014. It was only meant to be a 2-year course, but I actually deployed to Afghanistan with the Royal Air Force in the middle. So I was, what I thought was going to be a disadvantage of me, to have 2 cohorts, actually turned out to be a huge benefit, because I got to meet 2 great sets of people by way of my course mates. So had a great time on the course in a part-time environment. And for me, the value has been profound to my career, as well as to my life, just generally speaking. So the quality of the presentation just offered by Professor Joe then was very indicative of the course for me. And one of the really strong selling points for Cranfield in particular was this deep-rooted anchor to CSR. So it wasn't, and never has been, dressed up as a business school, but it is a school of management. So for me, there's a huge element and dynamic on the ethics and morality of how business can best be done in life. So it doesn't just generate leaders, doesn't just generate MBAs, it generates really profoundly different thinking leaders in life. So it was a brilliant journey for me, a hugely life-changing experience, and I felt a huge amount of support through not just my cohort and the staff, but ongoing after Cranfield. I've had a relationship with the university now for 14 years, and it's a relationship that I'm really proud of, but it's a relationship that continues to benefit me. So there was a huge amount of challenge in the MBA, not just because it was a difficult course, but it challenged the way one thinks, which was, for me, absolutely brilliant. I never expected to experience that sort of value from the MBA, and it was probably one of the biggest elements of value offered to me.
Alex, stick around. There's a bunch more questions coming your way. If I can jump,
Okay.
if I can jump to Leila and Matt, because I guess it's based on Ankit. That question, thankfully, that simple question but really complex question. Matt and Leila. Matt, I'll come to you first. What should people do when you're on the Executive MBA? Do you see each cohort addressing some of the challenges that Joe mentioned there differently, maybe to the full-time MBA? Matt, tell us more.
Yeah, I think one remarkable thing about the Executive MBA is that these are people who, are professionals in their own, are making their leaders in businesses or in whatever career they have, and they're coming into acquire this additional skill to help them manage their business more effectively. So they come from different backgrounds, and that's why on the Exec MBA we have 3 different streams. Those interested in commercial activities, or general business, or entrepreneurship, or even in finance. So their thinkings are, usually very different. Now, Joe's presentation, very superb as it is as an economist, so you can see his thinking along the areas of solving world problems, but there are also those who want to develop businesses. There are those who want to be more profound in managing finances of organizations. There are more of those who want to apply more strategies in, managing, businesses in their areas of work. So they will have different sort of people, different skills, and different things they're interested in. So that's something very astounding in the Executive MBA program.
Thank you, Matt. Leila, can I ask the same question of you? What do people do with the information that the likes of Joe, and we have more Joes if it's fair to say, Joe, what do they do with that information? Do they stun? Do they go and start a new business?
Yeah, so first of all, people absolutely love Joe because he's a legend, and his office is in the MBA lounge, and so I think the relationship is amazing. So I think something unique about us is that you can easily find us when you're in Cranfield. So we're not sort of hidden in our office. It's very kind of exposed, if you like. But that's what we kind of enjoy about, is the kind of building those relationships with the students from early on, and that's incredible how much they change since they sort of start the journey. I would say the power of Transformation MBA is in a sense of slightly different from the Executive Part-time MBA in a sense of the extent to which it's immersive. So you kind of, students make that kind of deliberate, conscious choice to take a pause, to take a break from the career. And it's in a sense quite self-indulging because it's all about you. It's a sort of a self-discovery journey from the start, all the way through. You get to the finish line, and I think everybody made that conscious choice because they want to change something. So it's either they kind of move up, they want to move up the seniority ladder, and they want to sort of build that confidence to make an impact. It's sometimes changing the sector, changing industry. So for whatever reason, they're all desperate to change. And I think getting on that journey with them, not knowing when's the light at the end of the tunnel, but also keep pushing, it kind of keeps us on our toes. And that's something I really enjoy being part of the kind of journeys. It kind of feels like living different lives with them. You are with them, with lows, with highs, and I think that's absolutely empowering. But yeah, it's kind of sort of things fall into their place over time, but it's kind of having that open-mindedness to be challenged and to be challenging others. It's something, and a quality that we really want to see in our MBA student. As Alex mentioned, it's just not a factory to sort of produce MBAs or future leaders. And the word transformation comes up a lot, and that's what we hear from the alumni, because I suppose at Cranfield, we really focus on the process. We focus on the journey to change, the journey that kind of, transform your outlook, your mindset, your network, your knowledge. And I suppose the outcome naturally happens. So, yeah.
Leila, thank you. Joe, I've got a question for you, and this is an interesting one and possibly a little contentious. You mentioned robots and AI taking over. Mm-hmm. Do you believe that policymakers are capable enough to frame these challenges in a manner that doesn't descend into civil unrest? It's conceivable, right?
Yeah, it's a very important question, and I'm not confident that all governments have the ability to cope with these changes, which is why I mentioned mega corporations are going to become more popular, or more dominant. I won't mention any names, but you can obviously think of a few at the top of the list already. Are governments capable? I think we're behind the curve. But I think there are leaders particularly in emerging markets, who are thinking, who are leapfrogging some of these traditional ways of running countries. So I want to be an optimist at all times, because otherwise I won't be able to sleep at night. Are these going to be smooth transitions? No, they won't. I think there will be disruptions. I use that phrase, but I think there will be some governments and some leaders who will be more successful than others. It's a question of investing in the future. And as I say, I think the concept of a cooperation between mega corporation and government is going to be a phenomenon that's going to develop. In the last 50 years, it's been oil companies in some countries and governments that have been working together. I think it's now going to be these mega corporations at the leading edge of AI who will have to work with companies, and vice versa. So only time will tell.
Only time will tell. Please keep those questions coming. If you hadn't had a chance to do that, put something into the text chat. Alex, if I can come to you next, because I'm very keen to hear a little bit more about circularity, but the extent to which what you've heard from Leila and from Matt, from Joe, is wheel spinning. How much of this that you hear, Alex, can you actually put into practice?
I think quite a lot, to be honest. It's something that I, again, didn't think I would be using pretty much every day of my life, but I actually am. So I'm the co-founder and CEO of Circularity, and I'll accept Professor Joe's challenge here, which is to try to describe a complex situation simply. We're a capital infrastructure developer looking to decarbonize aviation. And this requires integrating huge supply chains at a very large scale. So in order to lead an organization like that, I refer probably to one of the central themes to my time on Cranfield MBA, which was find people that are better than you in any walk of life, in any specialization, and work with people, be amongst the people, and lead them. So predominantly I do that on a daily basis. That is my job, ultimately. So I'm not producing the answers for my company. I am embodying the MBA by way of those values. And given that circularity is all about sustainability, we've also got that deeply rooted tie back into that CSR element, which was so deeply embodied on the Cranfield course as well.
Alex, thank you. Stick around, please. Maria Julia Benitez is asking, and this is for you, Joe, do you think the rapid transformation will also shift to how success is measured in organizations beyond mere financial performance?
Yeah, I hope so. Success for economies has traditionally and is still measured in terms of GDP. And I think that is changing slowly, but we're a long way from a broader measure of success. If you haven't looked it up yet, just Google it at the moment and look up the happiness index, which sounds a bit, lacking substance, but actually I recommend it to you highly. It's essentially measuring performance on a sort of balanced scorecard, taking a broader perspective. And it isn't going to be, economic growth for the sake of it that we're going to measure in the future. It's going to be, what about distribution of income? What about the environment? What about the pollution? What about, other measures that we want to include in this? So I think I would love to be able to look forward to the time when governments just don't focus on one measure of success. I think society will force governments to think more broadly, such as distribution, I said earlier. But look up the happiness index and it'll give you more food for thought. Thank you for that.
Brilliant. Thanks. Thank you. Keep those questions coming. I want to go, Matt, if I can, to you and find out a little bit more about in the Exec MBA, and Leila, I'll come to you after that. What else are helping people answer these problems, or at least understand these problems on the Executive MBA?
Yeah, as I said, the Executive MBA, it's very especially in the sense that it offers people various options. So at present, we have three streams which people can choose to study on the Exec MBA, on the commercial stream or entrepreneurship or finance. Now, if you look at global business in general, you find out that we can conveniently classify issues around business into these three areas, commercial activities, general management, or finance. So people are studying, the best way possible to manage their businesses in these three main areas. So in the Executive MBA program, we offer students the opportunity to learn the best possible way to manage issues around this area. I tell you some of the things we do around the finance stream, for instance, where students are exposed to what is happening in the financial world. How can businesses finance their company's activities with either loans, bonds, or whatever means possible, and also maximize profit at the same time. These are good techniques that people learn in our Exec MBA program. And of course, the other streams as well have some, very outstanding talent we have within the faculty to deliver on these specialties that we have. So in general, we tend to prefer, solutions to these different elements within the business world. As Professor Nellis did mention, we have to think, not just within the box, but outside the box. Or say businesses trying to innovate in different areas to help solve these problems. And that's what students gain from our Exec MBA program.
Matt, thank you. Leila, if I can come to you. You mentioned, Leila, being open-minded, and I took to come with that as a kind of hunger for more of this. There's quite a few tech-oriented, AI-oriented questions in the chat. What if someone comes to the Transformation MBA and wants to do something with that? Do they have time to think about that, or is it non-stop MBA?
Yeah, so I think it's a very intense program, but I think it's through that intensity that you kind of explore those areas. So under full-time MBA, we have 10 intended learning outcomes for someone to be completing their full-time MBA award. And half of them focused on the technical side of business and management, and the other half focused on people. And that's kind of linked to what Alex was talking about earlier. And I think it takes people a while to understand that as much as the technical knowledge and skills is important, equally it's important how you kind of manage others or lead others or challenge, your ideas being challenged, or, deal with challenging individuals, because we deliberately infuse friction into teams because we want to kind of simulate a real life scenario for students to be kind of working in multicultural teams, that the ideas are challenged. They have to learn how to motivate, how to influence, especially among a group of peers. Often it's much easier to influence and get something done when you are in a hierarchical environment. The way we kind of create these structures is that you all peers, you're all at the same level. And I think it kind of replicates the reality of people around the boardroom, where you have to engage with your peer cross-functional teams without having that sort of authority power, if you like. So I think that side of the MBA is equally important to the technical side. And I think when you look at the recruitment and market and employers' perception, that is the side. Alignment with companies' values, understanding what companies is all about, and ability to engage is often take the priority over technical skills. So like Joe was explaining, knowledge becoming more commodity, and your ability to kind of grasp technical skills faster than before. But if your value is not aligned, then it's a much tougher task. So we kind of pay equal attention to both sides. I think the other piece is we try to replicate, as I said, the real life environment through scenarios, simulation, case studies. For instance, we have a crisis management simulation where we invite real life journalists, and you receive a crisis case, you wake up, you're a CEO and your company's had bad press because you damaged and there was loss of life and so on. And then journalists coming to you and you have to prepare a press conference. I think putting you under those high pressured environment, also we have something called, very unique to Cranfield, we call VAC, written assessment of a case, where we assess you based on how you get your head around the case, and then you turn it around in 24 hours. So I think it's the way we deliver and our approach and philosophy to teaching and learning that really sort of sets us apart. In addition, the contemporary areas that we capture.
Leila, thank you. Joe, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I just want to add something to what both Matt and Leila said. And I want to stress this. It all sounds like nothing but work, and work. Can I also emphasize it's great fun?
Yes.
Leila mentioned the MBA Executive Lounge, and it's wonderful to meet students who actually have a lot of fun. I need to stress that. It isn't all work, but the work can be fun itself. And Leila mentioned the WAC, for example. Wow. The students take it very seriously, but afterwards they really do have a lot of fun. So please, it's all work and no play. There is lots of play, believe me. Okay.
Alex, can I come to you? You said something interesting, Alex, a minute ago, where you said you surrounded yourself by some interesting people. I want to hear a little bit more about that if I can. But also there's a question in the chat around Cranfield's reputation. What are employers saying about Cranfield? You've been around the block a bit. Say a bit more.
I can. If I could just expand on the fun element, I would expand on that to say it is also one of the most rewarding experiences you can do in education and in professional life. So the challenge to me was fun, but it also came in huge droves of the social elements of the course too. So in terms of surrounding myself with great people, there's no coincidence actually that there's a number of Cranfield alumni in the team. So to me, it was almost like the home from home of knowing somebody before you know them, if that makes sense. So I think it's one of these elements with Cranfield where the value of the organisation of Cranfield and the MBA isn't just rooted in one's own experience, but it's that network, the community that is built that spans different generations. And it's the ability that Cranfield has also brokered for me in the past of being able to access people that I would have thought there's no way I'd be able to access them in any other circumstances, except the alumni office has essentially made that introduction straight off the bat. So there's a number of different ways that I think that people do interact with the brand. I've actually been an entrepreneur for 10 years. So I've not really used the Cranfield brand by way of an employment opportunity for myself. I see it very much as a career opportunity for me. I have worked in a consultancy, but I was headhunted into it. And presumably, the Cranfield brand enormously helps. But it's not something I've got direct experience of when it comes to me putting out the Cranfield brand to say, please employ me, because I've actually looked at the value creation from the Cranfield MBA by way of my entrepreneurial journey and that profession. So I've used it very much more when it comes to leadership and looking forwards into into a sector or a global trend, to ask myself all of those difficult so what questions, but also what are we going to do next that can generate value for the planet, for society, and for ourselves. So, you know, a lot of my peer group actually did go into consultancy, and they've done very well. I'm in touch with the vast majority, but it's not something I've directly done myself.
That's quite an endorsement nonetheless, Alex. Thank you. A last question, I think we've only got a few minutes remaining. And Joe, this is to you. It's from Danny. Danny's saying, isn't the lack of sustained growth from the big three a case of diminishing returns? And aren't the big three in a better position to cope with the changing landscape?
Yeah, I'm less concerned about China. I think China is looking more internal at the moment, and then it will look external. So I don't see China as having a slow growth. It's slower growth, but I think it's still got huge potential domestically and internationally. I think Europe and the USA to some extent, it's a bit like, if you try and run faster and faster and faster, your times improve at a slower rate. So let's not look at this in a negative way. I think slower growth is not a bad thing. We've had in the so-called developed countries, we've had it very good for a very long time. But I'm much more interested in the opportunities for developing countries and emerging markets. And I think that's where the growth of the world is going to come from primarily. Although, as I say, there's still potential for Europe and USA to grow, and they will be growing more. Technology will ensure that, replacing old skills with new skills. But I think the excitement is about in the rest of the world as well. Thank you.
Brilliant. Brilliant. We've only got a few more minutes left. And I'm going to ask Matt and Leila, what should people be doing? If we piqued someone's interest to coming on the Executive MBA, what should they be doing right now?
Well, I think they should be thinking about, how to integrate with a very wide cohort that they're going to meet. I'll give you some statistics we have on our Executive MBA program. 67% of the students we have at the moment are from the UK, 18% from EU, while 15% from other parts of the world. So it's kind of a global cohort you're going to meet. So if you want to join us, that would be very fantastic. An opportunity to think about what area that you want to focus, whether it's the commercial, finance or entrepreneurship, and then prepare yourself towards these sort of challenges coming up.
Brilliant. If I can, Leila, just in 30 seconds, if I can ask you the same thing, what should people be doing to come on the Transformation MBA right now?
Yeah, I think just engage with us. I would say I would always encourage everybody to speak to students who are on the course. I think they are the best source to kind of hear from the stories and what's happening. It's a massive investment of time and finances. So I want you to be able to make the right decision, because it has to work for you, and we're here to support you if that's the right fit for you and for us. So just engage with us, and we're more than happy to help.
Fantastic, Leila. Thank you very much. We want to see you here. It goes without saying. We want to see you here on the Cranfield MBA as soon as possible. We've finished. We've run out of time. We could be talking about this a lot longer. Joe, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Time out of your busy day. Matt, thank you very much. Leila especially. And gosh, Alex, we're going to follow your career with great interest. So thank you for taking time to come to Cranfield. It's been fantastic. The producer today was Ellie Sharp. The studio managers were Robin Hackett and Chris Ripley. My name is Toby Thompson. Thank you for watching.